Well, most people would say the downfall was the storyline of One More Day back in 2007. But really, the downfall of Spider-Man began much earlier than that. In my opinion, you really have to go back to a storyline back in the 90s called the Clone Saga. Now, the Clone Saga is a really complicated storyline, which I don't want to get into too much here. But suffice it to say, what happened in the early 90s was that Spider-Man had been married for a few years with Mary Jane as his wife, and Marvel did not like the idea of Spider-Man being married. Had it been totally up to the people in charge at that time, they would never have done it, but Stan Lee basically at that time still had a lot of power and influence in Marvel Comics, and he is the one who instigated the marriage between Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson. This went on for some years, but Marvel wanted to get rid of that marriage, and one way they went about trying to undo it was through the Clone Saga. It did not start out that way, but as sales for the Clone Saga began to go up, and they began to think about new ways of continuing this storyline, they eventually hit on the idea of making Peter Parker a clone, and this other character called Ben Reilly as the real Spider-Man. That had not been the original intention of the Clone Saga, but like I said, as time went on, they decided to use that as a way of destroying Peter Parker's marriage. So you would have Ben Reilly, the now, quote, real Spider-Man, taking over from Peter Parker, and you would have Peter Parker go away with Mary Jane to live a normal life, and maybe occasionally doing some guest appearances, but other than that, they were to be never seen again, really, in the comics. Well, the reason why the Clone Saga is the beginning of the end for Spider-Man is because of what happened. You had Peter Parker and Mary Jane leaving the book, and as I said, Peter Parker at this point in time was supposed to be the clone. And Mary Jane at the time was pregnant with their child. And the pregnancy had just been written into the storyline because they were going to be written out of the Spider books. So the creators at that time had no problem giving Spider-Man a child. Now, had Peter Parker at that time stayed as the real, original Spider-Man, the creators at Marvel would never have given Spider-Man a child. We know that now for certain. But since he was supposed to be a clone and not the real Peter Parker, the original one, giving him a child was fine. And this, of course, is kind of a ludicrous idea that, superheroes can never have kids, they can never be married, but we'll get to that a little bit later. But the reason why it's the beginning of the end is that during the course of the story, as Ben Reilly took over as Spider-Man, a lot of things were happening at Marvel. People were coming in and going out. And also, sales of the Spider-Man comic book started to dip off. People did not like having this new character, Ben Reilly, forced on them. And they did not want to see Peter Parker leave. They did not want to see Mary Jane leave. So eventually the idea was brought back that, well, we need to bring Peter Parker back as the original Spider-Man and get rid of Ben Reilly. They had a lot of problems, of course, making that a reality because they had obviously done this entire storyline in the Clone Saga where they had clearly established that Peter Parker was the clone, Ben Reilly was the original Spider-Man, and he was going to stay as Spider-Man. And you had this even bigger problem, in their minds at least, of Mary Jane about to have a baby. So the original idea was that they were going to A, get Peter Parker back as the original Spider-Man, B, kill his child, and C, destroy the marriage by having Mary Jane just get up and leave after she loses the child. We know this for certain because the people that worked on it at the time have said that. But what happened during the course of this was that they came up with all kinds of ludicrous ideas of how to do this, and amazingly enough, they even had the idea briefly of bringing in Mephisto to try and undo all that had happened with the Clone Saga. That was dismissed as being, quote, ridiculous. But that's a little bit of irony there. But anyway, what happened was they decided to continue on for a while longer with Ben Reilly as Spider-Man. But they began to write stories in which the Green Goblin would come back and kill the clone, Ben Reilly, and establish Peter Parker as the original Spider-Man. And most disturbingly of all, they wanted the Green Goblin to be the villain responsible for killing his child. In that way, they could solve this problem of, what they viewed as a problem of Peter Parker and Mary Jane having a child. Marvel did not want even his marriage to exist, let alone have a child in the picture, so they wanted all that gone. Well, really, this was truly the beginning of the end for Spider-Man. In the story called Spider-Man Revelations, the Clone Saga finally came to a close. They killed off Ben Reilly, brought back the Green Goblin, who had been dead for many, many decades, and used him as the main villain to get rid of Ben Reilly, establish Peter Parker as the real Spider-Man again, and most tragically of all, of course, killing off Spider-Man's baby daughter by forcing Mary Jane to have a miscarriage. It was truly the darkest story I have ever read, and one of the most gut-wrenching ones. It's just etched in my mind. It's a very, very dark, very sad story. Interestingly enough, they decided at the last moment to not kill off Peter Parker's marriage. They were going to end the marriage after she lost the child by just having her give up and leave Peter Parker. But Marvel decided not to do that because, in their words, they were afraid that they would have a riot on their hands. They were already killing off his daughter, and they were killing off Ben Reilly, who was loved by a small but very vocal minority of people in the Spider-Man fan base. And they decided, doing all that, they didn't want to end Spider-Man's marriage just yet. So they waited for a while. The consequences of this storyline, Spider-Man Revelations, was just awful. The only bright spot that came out of all of this was that they had left some indication that the baby might not be dead, that Peter Parker's child might have been kidnapped by the Green Goblin and only made to look like the child had died. They never completely answered that question, but at the time, their intention was to leave the door open to give a little hope there that someday he might find his daughter alive. But what we know now is that they never really had any intention of following that up. That was just a way of cruelly teasing people into thinking that his child might still be out there and still be alive. Well, Marvel decided to allow the marriage to continue throughout most of the 90s, right up until around 1999, if I remember correctly. And they had some good storylines. I remember those very clearly. I read them. I still have all those stories. At the time, you could subscribe to Marvel comic books through mail, and you would get your favorite comic books through the mailbox. and I would get them. I subscribed to all the Spider-Man titles at the time. There were quite a few, and I kept up with them. And I always kept out hope that hopefully Marvel would one day rectify the storyline with his baby daughter. Hoping that she would be brought back. Of course, now I know that they had no intention of doing that. But even so, the storylines were pretty good in my opinion. I loved the relationship with Peter Parker and his wife, Mary Jane. And it didn't get brought up a whole lot, but occasionally, every now and then, their deceased daughter was mentioned. It was only briefly, but it was acknowledged in the comic books. It wasn't just ignored forever, at least not then. However, that was all about to change because right around at the end of the 90s, Marvel made the decision to destroy Spider-Man's marriage again. You have to keep in mind that Marvel always, always, always hated the idea of Spider-Man being married to Mary Jane. They hated it. They hated the character, they hated the marriage, and for decades on end, with the exception of this period between Spider-Man Revelations and throughout the rest of the 90s, they were constantly trying to find ways of destroying this marriage. But they had really messed that up with the Clone Saga. So you get around to about 1999, 2000, somewhere in there, they decide to end Spider-Man's marriage by having Mary Jane seamlessly die in a plane crash, although they don't make it completely clear that she dies in this mysterious plane crash. And they bring back Aunt May. And the Aunt May character at that time in the 90s had been killed off during the Clone Saga. She had simply died of old age, basically. But because Marvel at that time wanted to get Spider-Man back to, quote, his roots, they wanted to bring back Aunt May, get rid of Mary Jane, and they wanted to retcon the entire pregnancy storyline with Mary Jane. In other words, Mary Jane would be gone. She would supposedly be dead in this plane crash, but they were to have no child. The child never existed. There was no pregnancy. There was no baby. So that was retconned out of the Spider-Man continuity when this was done. So at that time, late 90s, early 2000s, Aunt May is brought back in. Mary Jane is seemingly killed off in a plane crash. And the storyline with the baby and even the Clone Saga itself was written out of the continuity of Spider-Man. And it is at that time that I quit reading Spider-Man altogether. Well, you have to remember, at that time I had stopped reading Spider-Man, so I was out of the loop as to what was happening in the Spider-Man books. I don't know when exactly the marriage came back, but basically my understanding is this, that the Spider-Man books were still not doing very well, sales were not good, so the decision was made to give the marriage one more shot. A new writer came in and restored Spider-Man's marriage. Spider-Man found Mary Jane alive. She had not died in this plane crash. And I think he found her with the assistance of Captain America, if I remember correctly. And unfortunately, of course, I had no idea that this was happening. I had no idea that Peter Parker and Mary Jane were back together. When I don't remember exactly how I found out. I think it was through the internet that I found out they were together again. But when I did, and I got back to reading Spider-Man, the storyline of One More Day was almost upon us. So, needless to say, I did not get to enjoy the return of Spider-Man's marriage for very long. Well, shell-shocked and confused. You have to remember, I had not been keeping up with the comic book since the marriage had been undone the first time back in the late 90s and early 2000s. So, I come in and to the comic book store, and I know now that Peter Parker and Mary Jane are back together. What I didn't know completely is that during this time there had been a storyline called Civil War, and Spider-Man had revealed his secret identity to the world. I think most of us knew that Marvel would never allow Spider-Man's identity to stay revealed to the entire Marvel Universe for long. So, I'm kind of aware of that story. But then, I come in right at the end of this book, and One More Day comes about. And One More Day, of course, came about for two reasons. Obviously, the first reason would be the Civil War storyline in which Spider-Man had revealed his secret identity. Marvel wanted to undo that, and they didn't quite know how to do it, so they thought they would bring in this character called Mephisto, who is basically the devil in the Marvel Universe. But even worse was the fact that they wanted to also use this Mephisto character to undo the marriage between Mary Jane and Peter Parker so that it never happened. It was just stunning to me because you have to remember, I did not know that they were back together in the first place, and I had just started reading the comic book again when this storyline came out. So it was just mind-numbingly. I couldn't grasp it. I couldn't understand why Marvel was doing this. I mean, and it wasn't fair to me personally because I had not been keeping up with the comic book, and now they were going to undo the marriage right when I was coming back into Spider-Man. But they did this storyline, and really it was the third attempt and final attempt to destroy Spider-Man's marriage. Really, the first time would have been in the Clone Saga, even though technically they were still married and all. But they were going to try to destroy it then after the Clone Saga ended. They had originally intended to end the marriage then. They decided not to. Then they tried to end the marriage for good back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And now they were doing it again in 2007. So they end the marriage by making a deal with Mephisto. Aunt May is wounded thanks to Peter Parker revealing his secret identity to the world. And the whole storyline is just awful. First off, Peter Parker would never make a deal with Mephisto, and certainly not a deal to try and destroy his marriage in return for bringing Aunt May back to life. That was the plot, really, of One More Day. It was Peter Parker trying to find a way to save Aunt May, this old woman who, frankly, should have stayed dead way back in the 90s. But Marvel didn't want her dead, so they wanted her back, and they wanted Mary Jane gone, they wanted the marriage gone. And to do that, they not only do they end what was a great marriage and a great powerhouse couple like Peter Parker and Mary Jane, but they do it in a way that doesn't make sense. Spider-Man would never want to make a deal with Mephisto to end his relationship with Mary Jane. He would never do that. He would want to be with Mary Jane. He would never try to make any kind of deal where his marriage was dissolved. The story is very much out of character when it comes to Peter Parker. He would never have made any kind of deal with Mephisto whatsoever in the first place, let alone a deal that would end his marriage to Mary Jane Watson. He loved that woman. He loved Mary Jane with all his heart. And he would do anything to stay with her. He would never try to get away from her or make some kind of deal where they could not be together. But of course, this was Marvel after all, and Joe Quesada, who hated the marriage, just insisted that this storyline go forward and that his marriage be destroyed and retconned right out of existence. He is to blame, really, for that storyline and the subsequent ending of his marriage to Mary Jane Watson, and also the way that he Peter Parker went about ending the marriage, being so out of character and everything. I really blame Joe Quesada for that more than anyone. But yeah, Marvel had tried to destroy this marriage really 3 times, and the third time is the charm, unfortunately. And so finally, they got what they wanted. They destroyed Spider-Man's marriage. They ended what was a wonderful and great couple in comic book history. You'll never see that again. Well, you have to remember that Marvel tried 3 times to destroy this marriage over the course of nearly 2 decades or more. And on the third try, they finally succeeded. But if you needed more proof than that the marriage will not be coming back, recently they had a storyline in the Spider-Man comics called Renew Your Vows. And this took place in the Secret Wars storyline, in which the Marvel Universe had been basically destroyed and everything was kind of up and down, and the universe was in a mess, basically. It was Marvel's version of the New 52 from DC. And in one of these storylines, they had a Peter Parker from an alternate reality married to Mary Jane. It was called Renew Your Vows, and many people, including myself, got their hopes up that Marvel would finally, after all these years, would bring back Peter Parker and Mary Jane's marriage. That turned out not to be the case, and it was just false hope. They were never ever going to bring back Peter Parker and Mary Jane's marriage. In fact, they stated recently that Mary Jane will no longer be appearing in Spider-Man at all. She will be appearing in Iron Man alongside Tony Stark's character as a possible love interest or something to that effect. Marvel hasn't been very clear. But what they have been clear on is that she will not be in the Spider-Man books at all, and she will be in Iron Man. So, I mean, there you have it. That's the final verdict. And that doesn't mean just that she's not going to be with Spider-Man for a few years to come, or even 10 years. The heads of Marvel Comics hated the marriage, they hated Mary Jane, and they don't want Spider-Man to be married to Mary Jane ever again. So unless you get new people who come in to Marvel in the top, and unless those people decide that they want the marriage to come back, that they like it, and they think that it should be given another chance, unless something like that happens, you're never ever going to see Spider-Man with Mary Jane ever again. And really, I don't think we will ever see those two together again. Even 10 years from now or 20 years from now, you will not see Peter Parker and Mary Jane together ever again. It's just a tragedy, because they were such a great couple, and it was so unique to have a superhero married and at one point even on the verge of having a family. It was just devastating to realize, especially these last few years, that that marriage, that relationship between the both of them will not be coming back. The lesson I take away from this is, quite a few things I take away from this, actually. Uh, one lesson I learned from all of this is something that I just didn't know or didn't care to know back in the days when I was reading Spider-Man regularly, and that is this. Creators, writers, the people in charge of, writing storylines, in this case, Spider-Man's storylines, if they don't want to do something, they will not do it. And if they want to do something, they will do it, irregardless of how the fans feel. I always thought that, the old saying, the customer is always right. Well, I thought that, I ignorantly thought that the creators of Spider-Man and the people behind Marvel Comics would always listen to their fans and try to give them what they want. They do not do that. There are a lot of people out there who love the marriage between Mary Jane and Peter Parker, and they will not bring it back. Irregardless of how vocal we are, they don't care. As long as people are still picking up the book and reading it and buying it, most importantly, they don't care. And that brings us to another problem with comics, specifically Spider-Man. As long as people keep buying Spider-Man as it is now, you're only enabling stories like this to continue. If there are no consequences financially for Marvel for destroying Spider-Man's marriage, then there's no incentive for them to change. So as long as you're continuing to pick up a Spider-Man book and buy it and read it, you are making sure that this marriage stays dead. So unless you're willing to put down that book and stop buying Spider-Man comics, just get used to the idea that you will never again see Spider-Man and Mary Jane back together. Because the creators and writers of Spider-Man, and any other comic book for that matter, do not care what you think. Like I said, one of the things that I learned throughout this whole ordeal with Spider-Man's marriage and all of that is that creators do what they want to do, not what the fans want them to do. Whenever you hear a writer or a creator of a comic book say they can't do, in this case, they can't do a marriage between Mary Jane and Peter Parker, what they're really telling you is they won't. It's not that they can't, they won't. They do not want to do it, and they will not do it. Because if these head honchos at Marvel liked the idea of Spider-Man being married, they could do it, and they could make it work with any kind of storyline they wanted to tell. The excuse is always, well, we can't tell certain stories with a married Spider-Man. We can't tell certain stories with a Spider-Man who has a daughter or a family. That is baloney. It's an imaginary world. You're only limited by your own imagination. You can make any storyline work, and these guys could make a married Spider-Man work if they wanted to. The thing is, they don't. They don't like Mary Jane. They don't like a marriage between Peter Parker and Mary Jane, and so they will not do it. It's not that they can't, they won't. That's what you have to remember. And that's really opened up my eyes to the fact that, not just in Spider-Man, but in any superhero book, you're never going to see any of these personal relationships go anywhere. And for me, having gone through what I've gone through with Spider-Man, not only will I never read Spider-Man again, I haven't read him for a long time, but I will never read another comic book again, period. Because now I know the tricks. Now I know that no matter what these storylines do, as far as the personal relationships go with these superheroes, they will never go anywhere. A lot of these companies, especially Marvel and DC, are obsessed with keeping things the way they have always been. There's always the illusion of change, but really no matter how things change, they always stay the same. I don't need to read Spider-Man anymore because I know what will happen in the stories. This is what will happen. You want to know? Here it is. Spider-Man fights a villain. Spider-Man gets beaten. Spider-Man rises up to the occasion because he has power and responsibility. Spider-Man can't make it work with a woman because he has a secret identity and he has power and responsibility. Spider-Man finally defeats the villain, but, as always, he's a loser in love. And he's a loser, period. That's it. That's the plot line of every single Spider-Man issue from now on. I can guarantee you that's the way it will be. I don't have to read them to know that's exactly what it will be. Because when you don't have Mary Jane, you don't have this wonderful marriage, this wonderful dynamic between Peter Parker and Mary Jane, when you don't have that, you don't have Spider-Man. Spider-Man should be more than just about beating up villains and power and responsibility. He should get a chance to have a normal life of some kind. Obviously, he can't have a regular, normal life, but he should at least be allowed to have the love of his life, Mary Jane. Because that gives him something personally to fight for, other than just trying to beat the villain of the week, or the month, I should say. But they're never going to do that. Marvel, DC, a lot of these comic companies, they don't want to take chances, real chances, with their characters. Oh yeah, they'll give them lots of changes. They'll change their costume, their powers. They'll make them billionaires, give them all kinds of sidekicks, etc. But they will never do the one thing that matters the most, that would make the greatest difference, and would give them a great challenge to work with. And that is having a married superhero. And in this case, having a married Spider-Man with a family. So, you're never going to see the marriage ever come back. And that's why I'm never going to read Spider-Man ever again. It's unfortunate because he was my childhood hero. But the Spider-Man of today is simply not the Spider-Man I grew up reading. He's not the same hero. And quite frankly, the stories are just depressing without Mary Jane and without his marriage. So I have no wish or desire to keep reading a book that just depresses me and gives me no entertainment whatsoever. I get nothing out of reading a Spider-Man book that has no marriage between him and Mary Jane. That's unfortunate, but I try to take it as, a life lesson learned. And that is to not ever get attached to comic book characters, because they will never ever have any real success in their personal lives. They will never get the girl. They will never reach that goal of having something to fight for other than just defeating the bad guy of the week. There's nothing for me there. Comic books just don't hold my interest anymore, especially Spider-Man comics. So, what can I say? It's over for me and Spider-Man. And that's unfortunate, because Spider-Man was a great character, and it was a great comic book while it lasted. But those days are gone forever. But before I go, I just want to leave these parting words to Joe Quesada. This is for you, buddy.
Use small words that you'll be sure to understand, you warthog-faced buffoon.
You pompous, stuck-up, snot-nosed.
You shit-kicking, stinky horse-smelling motherfucker, you!
You dirt-eating piece of slime! You scum-sucking pig! You son of a motherless goat!
No business born insecure junkyard motherfucker!
Fuck you! Yeah, that's my message to you. Fuck you and kiss my ass.
You're an emotional fucking cripple. Your soul is dog shit. Every single fucking thing about you is ugly.
You are physically repulsive, intellectually retarded, vulgar, insensitive, selfish, stupid. You have no taste, a lousy sense of humor, and you smell.